Whether you are a TO, whether you are a volunteer, or whether you are a rider, you have the ability to address some of these concerns or some of these roadblocks, barriers, hurdles, whatever you want to call them, that India mentioned, and you have the ability to change that within your track. If nobody's doing that at your track, you can be that.
I was going to say, because this is something that I've also carried with me over the years, is if you're seeing a problem and you think, man, they should really just be doing this. They should really just be doing this. And I've heard that so many times throughout our BMX history. Yeah. They should be really, yeah. If you see it, it is officially now your responsibility to do it, because not everyone can see it. And the fact that you can tells me and everyone else that you have a strength in that area to cause a change for the better. And honestly, you're doing them a disservice by not putting yourself out there as that volunteer or contributor to make sure that this problem is solved.
BMX Breakthrough is bridging the gap from old school to new school, from tracks to manufacturers, from new riders to their local tracks, and it doesn't stop at racing, but the mission is to connect people with bikes. Join me, Jay Oakes, as I interview key people in the sport and in the industry that are involved in their local circles, in their communities, at their local tracks, and aiming to make a difference on a local level. You'll hear stories, marketing tips, failures, successes, and a way to make a difference in your local BMX community. Let's dive in as we kick off this next episode. All right. Today's conversation is going to be different than any other conversation that we've had on the podcast so far. And that is because I'm interviewing somebody that has very little experience in the sport of BMX. Now, the reason that we're doing this is because it's great to talk about the history of BMX. We love doing that. I love having conversations with people about their involvement in the sport and their knowledge of the sport. But the reason for this conversation is because it's impossible to grow the sport if we don't know the hurdles that new members have in the sport. And so anyway, the conversation that I'm having today happens to be with my wife. So India, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about your understanding of BMX, coming into it, and your background in BMX, rather.
Okay, so my name is India. I'm Jay's wife. My background in BMX is pretty much nothing. My understanding of bicycles, when I met Jay at 17, my understanding of bicycles was what you could buy at a Walmart or a Kmart. And I had my one and only bike when I was 10, and it was way too big for me at the time. And then it was way too small for me as I grew up. And I might have ridden it 5-10 times max.
So not a lot of experience on the bike. So I came into the picture and we started dating, and I started introducing India to the world of bikes.
All of the bikes.
All the bikes.
How many you need for every individual area.
And so this is somebody that came from a background of maybe you need one bike, and maybe, and then Jay has far more bikes. And then we'll fast forward to a few years ago. We introduced our kids to the sport of BMX. And it was something that India was excited about, but she had no familiarity with. So that was the first track that we took our kids to, was Lancaster, California. So Southern California, we were out in, I think we were out in Acton at the time.
Was Lancaster really the first one?
It was.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. And so we went there and we brought the kids out there. And so just tell me a little bit of your experience going to a track for the first time and kind of what that was like.
Well, I guess looking back at Lancaster, I think my experience was it was dirty, which I realize that that's pretty silly. But for having not, I mean, I have no problem. I mean, you know this. I have no problem getting my hands dirty and working in the yard and doing stuff. But I just remember thinking, wow, this is really dusty. I wore the wrong shoes. But then I remember thinking, Jay, why are we here? This is amazing, but it's also very, very strange. And so I didn't fully grasp it until the kids got on the track. And then every single time they took a lap, they would come back to me and they were so excited. They were very sweaty. They were just their cheeks were so pink and they were so happy to be there. And then I instantly realized my job, which was as a mother of very young children, I need to make sure they were hydrating and eating enough and had enough energy because at least when they're really little, all they want to do is be out on the track and they just burn through every ounce of energy even before the race begins. So
Yeah.
I was pretty much trying to prevent meltdown. And because I didn't know anything, I didn't even know where the bathroom was. I didn't know how to help my kids. I didn't know who to talk to. I didn't even know how to navigate the track because I mean, I didn't know it at the time, but every track is different. So whenever we would go to other places, it was incredibly intimidating. And then when my amazing husband strikes up a conversation with someone at the track, because now I know the community, but at the time I didn't, then I was just like, oh, I guess we're going to be hanging out here for another hour. And I'm just kind of twiddling my thumbs. What do I do? So it was very different.
So you bring up a good point because you gloss over it a little bit, but I want to come back to it. The reason that we're having this conversation is because the outside perspective to the sport is something that we want to address.
Hmm.
And if you are a track operator, if you are involved in a track, I want to encourage you to listen to this episode and almost take notes as a result of it, because the whole goal is to help you understand what people are seeing, or maybe more importantly, are not seeing and not getting at
Hmm.
their track. So coming in, you said you were intimidated.
Yeah,
So
big time.
and that wasn't, and anything that we're saying, we're not talking Lancaster was the first track that we went to, but that is not the track that we're talking about. We had a lot of fun at that track, and then but we proceeded that year to go to 20 different 24 different tracks that year.
I would say it was every single track that we went to.
So what is that intimidation like?
Ooh, it's incredibly lonely, especially as a woman in a male dominated sport. Because I wasn't a guy, and then because I was a mom or quote unquote just a mom, um, I automatically was just kind of pushed to the side as a wallflower. And it was hard because now naturally I don't love putting myself into situations where I get to hang out with strangers. I'm not Jay. But I have no problem talking to a stranger and saying, "Hey, how's it going?" or asking questions or "Excuse me, do you know this?" or just putting myself out there. I can be friendly and people who have met me know like, "What, India? She's totally friendly." Like I'm terrified and nervous most of the time, but people don't always know that. And so because I try and I worked hard to at least understand because I was so lost and I was very intimidated, it became very obvious to me the areas that could use improvement at all the tracks that we went to. Something I want to mention because I know that the listeners wouldn't necessarily know this is that in Jay and I, we worked together for like 7 years in the nonprofit sector. And a lot of my job during that period of time was to help people assimilate, to help people plug in and get to know the nonprofit as a whole, to figure out where their place is and to feel that sense of belonging. So my job had everything to do with the moment that a person drove onto the property to the moment that a person was fully plugged in and involved and participating in volunteering opportunities and felt completely connected and just a part of that community. So my specialty was making sure that someone felt that sense of belonging. So to be put into an environment for a year, there were moments that were very challenging, but then there were also moments that were incredibly rewarding and wonderful. And I thought, hey, this is amazing. I love this. And so I know that this episode has so much value because we don't know the things that we can't see if we're looking at the same stuff all the time. And those fresh eyes, that new perspective is vital. And that's actually something that we have done, Jay and I, we have done many times over the years with our businesses or other opportunities, projects that we're working on is we'll ask people, hey, you haven't seen this before. We would love your fresh perspective because you have you have fresh eyes. Can you look at this and tell us what's wrong or what's missing or how can we do better? And so this being something that we care about so much, I know that my opinion here or my experience, it is important.
Yeah. And one of the other things that you mentioned about coming in and feeling intimidated was also even where's the bathroom?
Mhm.
And so something as simple as that. And in a lot of tracks cases, this is not always the case, but a lot of times there are situations where the TO and the volunteer team is operating on a bare bones system,
Mhm.
and
Or budget
everyone
for that matter.
everyone is busy.
Mhm.
And so you have a new family that comes in, but there's nobody available, easily accessible to be able to ask that question. Where is your bathroom? Where do I get signed up at? Now, a lot of places will have like registration on the registration booth, building, snack shack, whatever the case is.
I didn't even know that there was a registration booth building slash snack shack. I
Yeah.
didn't know that they had snacks. I didn't know that whatever random hut that was on the property that was normally locked up all of a sudden opened up and was what it was.
Yeah. And so a lot of that came down to me talking to India and saying, okay, well, what we would do is we would get to the track, and I had familiarity with the sport. And so I would say I would go up to registration, and then I would have India get the kids ready. And if you're a parent of young kids, you understand like the difficulty of getting kids ready with their gloves and their helmets and their
Yeah.
jerseys and getting ears
Gloves.
tied and losing gloves.
Oh, and tying shoes. Go to Velcro. If you
Yeah.
have a little kid and you're dealing with the track, oh my gosh, just use Velcro.
It's true.
Yeah.
Um, so India would come in, and she would uh, not know that there was a registration booth. I think for almost the entire first year that we were in racing, you almost didn't even know where
I
registration
wouldn't know
was
where it was. No,
because I had gone to register.
yeah, you would leave, and my job was to get the kids dressed, which was sweaty because I'm just trying so hard. And we usually arrived on the property and I'm like, okay, we got to do this and this and this. India, you help them. And I'm like, I can't find all this stuff. And so this was before we had gear bags. Yeah, it was challenging, fun,
And
but challenging.
and so it made a different dynamic because then I will say another thing is that when you show up at practice time or a little bit late, it provides undue stress. So
Mhm.
if you have new families, I would encourage you to encourage them to say, hey, why don't you show up like 15 minutes early to practice? Our practice starts at 6 o'clock. Why don't you show up at 5:45 so you can get your kids ready so that there's no stress, so that you can walk over to registration, you can send your kid up onto the hill, you can get registered, make it really easy. Because as a dad, even though I was trying to create this experience for my kids, I know that I definitely made some mistakes by coming in and being late and then going, oh man, the kids need to practice and we're late. And India, you do this. So I put stress on her. I put stress on myself. I put stress on my kids. And then going into a new track can be intimidating, even for me who knows. And then for India, again, coming into the sport, having zero familiarity with the way that this sport operates and
Mhm.
functions.
I think the biggest thing that could help a track that I have seen over the years, since we've done this, that is the easiest and will require zero volunteers is signage. It's I know that you're listening to this right now and you're thinking, I don't know. Just listen. Okay. This is really, really important. If there was a sign with an arrow that told me where the restroom was, I wouldn't have to stop and find a volunteer or ask a parent, and it would have reduced that stress immediately. If there was a sign that told me where the moto board was, that I even needed to know what a moto board is to find said moto sheets. To be honest with you, I've seen moto sheets over the years. I still can't tell you what the heck it is. Like I can, but it's still really challenging because I barely understand the points. And that is challenging. I get overwhelmed trying to talk about it, or I get stressed out because I'm not the one doing the racing. And so it's really important to have additional signage because it can be so hard. You can say hello to someone, and I would guess that if you're a TO and you're listening to this and you have volunteers on your team, you say, hey, if you see someone new, go out of your way to say hi to them. And people will do that. I had people walk up and say hi to me, but I never had someone walk up, say hi, and say, hey, if you need anything tonight, if you have questions, if you don't know where to go, if you get lost, or maybe you don't even know where the restroom is, you come find me. I'll be right over here. Ask me this question. That's a really easy thing to say. And all you're going is going from saying hi to adding a little sentence after that to make sure that that person then knows, hey, I'm somebody who knows what I'm doing.
I'm your tour guide for the evening.
Yeah. And they don't even have to stand nearby or say, hey, I'm going to be up at the gate, or hey, I'm going to have this clipboard and I'm going to be standing right here at the finish line. If you need anything, come talk to me and I can explain the whole schedule, whatever. Because a volunteer can be busy, but there's nothing wrong with having a conversation.
Yep.
But signage, no. If you had a sign that said what to expect, oh my gosh, that would be the like holy grail of signs that just said step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're gonna do check the moto sheet. Moto 1's going to start. Moto 2 is going to start. Take a break in between for like 5 to 10 minutes. And then here's 3. And it's just simply outlining what your average night is and leaving it up.
Reducing questions, reducing confusion, reducing stress is going to make it so much easier.
So I want to stop you there because this is what's really important is that if I was a single mom, based on the stress, I would not have gone back to the tracks that we went to. And it's not to say that the tracks did anything specifically wrong. It's because I was so overwhelmed by getting the kids ready, making sure they had their gear. It was such a challenging little bit. And the kids were what? How old were they?
He had just turned 4 and she was 5.5.
Okay. So young.
Yeah.
So to do all of those things, even just once a week, was challenging. And then to show up in an environment where I didn't know anyone, I didn't know exactly what to do. And I mean, thank goodness I had Jay, but if you're a single parent, you don't know that you're supposed to hold your kid at the gate. You don't know that you're supposed to where you're supposed to sit, where what's going to happen, what the layout of the evening will look like. I don't know. I mean, even me, I don't know how many times I've almost forgot to send the kids over to the snack shack to get a trophy or whatever because I was like, oh, it's over. I guess we're leaving. And so the stress level can prevent someone from coming back, and that is really hard.
Or even beyond the stress level, feeling like an idiot.
That's a better way of putting it.
And that's pretty blunt, but nobody likes to feel dumb. Nobody wants to feel inadequate. Nobody wants to feel under-equipped. And in that situation, by providing signage, where's the restroom? Sometimes I think as silly as it sounds, sometimes that can be an obstacle. That's like, well, I don't really want to ask somebody where the restroom is, or especially if your team looks and seems and acts overwhelmed. For somebody to be able to come in and see where the restroom is, instead of having to ask your stressed out or overtasked volunteer who might seem overwhelmed, and for me to have to go up and say, hey, I know you look really busy. Where's the restroom?
Well, for my kid who's maybe going to pee their pants because they forgot, or
because you have a 2, 3, 4-year-old.
Oh my gosh,
that can be really difficult.
Well, especially like think about families. If they've got a 7-year-old kid, maybe that kid is the oldest of the bunch. What if you have kids that are 4 years apart? And that's just if you have a couple, and it can be really hard when you're balancing like significant age gaps. And maybe someone has a baby. There's only so many hands, and if you have to do it alone, especially with not knowing, it's hard. I kind of want to actually flip this conversation and go from not just what tracks should be doing, but I wanted to kind of celebrate what that first year experience was like in the tracks that did so incredibly well. The ones that were they had the best experiences. Would that be
Go
okay?
for it.
Okay. So during that period of time, I fell in love with the community. I had spent years getting to know Jay and seeing his thirst for community and connection. I mean, the guy is like living, walking, talking, networking. He wants to make friends all across the country. I don't know how many times I've had to force myself getting used to meeting strangers and being like, "Oh, we're best friends now." And so those of you that are listening, you're probably one of those people. You get it. But because Jay is that way and because he cares so much, I've always wondered, because I'm a nerd and I analyze things. I've always wondered where that came from, and I didn't understand. And so there was this one time I wanted to really just brag on them because they were amazing. We were in Utah. You probably remember the name of the track.
Yeah.
Um,
Brad Canyon.
okay, yeah, yeah.
Brad Canyon BMX.
So we're driving through Utah, and Jay is looking up on social media. Oh, there's a race tonight. We can make it. And I'm thinking, okay. And because I think I had just messed up my ankle. So I was broken, which made it really challenging to be his like helper when it came to the kids, because by then we didn't have gear bags. We didn't have all of our stuff together, and all of everything in the back of the trailer was just kind of strewn about. And so we were driving through, and he said, if we hurry, we can make it just in time. And then he said, I think maybe 40 minutes later, oh, I got them registered online. So we got it all figured out. So we're going to like just arrive on time. So we didn't know where we were going. We're pulling this giant trailer. We pull up and we realize that we weren't sure if we could make it down the hill into where the track was. So we had to pull in up top. I could barely walk. And he takes the kids, they throw on their gear, and then they ride down this hill. And I kind of like hobble my way down the hill with the camera in my hand. And I'm thinking, why do I have this camera? Because at the time, I didn't take a lot of pictures. I do now. But Jay was like, you should take more pictures, do this. So we get down in there, and it was really awkward at first. I didn't know anyone, and I'm just standing there, and I just thought, okay, we'll get through this, and then I can, meet people maybe, and then we'll leave. And then I could stop, having to, I don't know, be social or something. And so um the crazy part is that by the end of the race, Jay comes up to me and he said, I talked to the TO. It was really incredible. He's actually going to let us stay here for the night, because we realized we didn't actually know where we were going to stay. We thought maybe just find a truck stop or rest area or something. And the TO said, no, you should stay here. And then, I mean, Jay, of course, was beaming, because all I thought was, that's crazy. Okay. I mean, they're going to let us. That's so nice. And then the TO ended up staying. I don't even remember what time the race started. But the TO stayed until, was it like 10 or 11 o'clock at night?
Yeah.
Some crazy late night. And it was midweek. So they had to go to work the next day. And the lights were left on. And he kept saying, like, hey, I got the bathrooms open. The lights are on for you if you need anything. And he kept saying that. And then it finally dawned on me that he was staying there with all of these things on just for us, so that we could experience, use the bathroom if we needed to. And I was like, wow, like, you're making all this extra effort. And then I find out that while Jay has to move the trailer and get it all set up, that Ashlyn had ridden over to the TO, the only other person there, and said, hey, do you have a bike? And he said, yeah. And she's like, do you want to race? And he said, yeah. And so then they go out and they race, and I mean, it's in the dark, so they have the lights on. She's racing, and I'm trying to help set up the trailer with Oliver, and he's exhausted, so he's crying. And Jay's doing all this stuff. And Ashlyn races over, and she's all sweating. She's like, Dad, I raced that guy and I won. And all I'm thinking is, wow, that is so cool. And so all of these things happened. Then the TO leaves. We're all settled in for the night. And then I find out from Jay that because he locked us in with the gate, that the TO's plan was to come back the next morning and unlock it for us before he went to work. It was in that moment that I felt like I finally understood where Jay's desire for community came from. In all of his years and all of that growing up and racing and getting to know people, he recognized that when you race, you belong. And I just, I had been a part of many communities, but I had never seen something like that where you were instantly a part of this family. And so I have been to, we had been to a bunch of tracks in that first year, and I've been to plenty more. But there is nothing like that one experience because the amount of effort made for people that were absolute strangers, they didn't know us at all, but we were automatically respected, trusted, valued, and just treated with so much kindness that we just belonged. Like, hey, let's be friends. Let's hang out. You want to have a meal together? Let's do that. That has been very, I would say, consistent with the tracks that are doing things just above and beyond. And I wanted to touch on this moment with Brad Canyon because,
And a special shout out to Jared Mitchell.
yeah,
Jared, you are a huge part of our BMX story,
yeah,
and the effort that you made is absolutely incredible.
it seriously, it was.
If you have contact with him, because I probably won't be like, hey, we were breaking on you in this episode, you should share this with him, and you should show him how much we care about him.
I had never been in an environment where people said, hey, you're a part of us and come enjoy this with us. And it was so different and so just above and beyond anything else that I'd been a part of. And I felt instantly like I understood where Jay had come from. It was really powerful. And so it was that moment that I said, okay, I get it now. And so we would go to tracks that some tracks did something similar to that, and they would go out of their way to say hi, and they would, as uncomfortable as it may be for me because I don't know anyone, they would at least make effort, or they would invite us to join them for a meal after a race, or we would have people. One time there was a big race, and they're like, "Oh, don't go to dinner. Just we're gonna have tacos. Just come over and hang out with us." And so I think we just happened to have chairs in the back of the truck. And so we just sat down and we hung out and we had a great time. We didn't have to bring anything. They had all the food. I mean, just little bits and pieces like that where there were no expectations. There was just extra. And so there was this belonging, and it was just blessing people. It was so nice. But we've also been to tracks that are not good at that. And it was disappointing. And I will say this is that I have been to tracks with a lot of money and a lot of resources that are not good at that. I've been at tracks that are also good at that, that have money and resources, and vice versa. So my point is that it didn't have anything to do with the money and the resources. It had everything to do with the belief and community and the love that trickled down from the TO.
Yeah, it starts at the leadership level.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And so to have that level of leadership that cared so much about people, that then the volunteers saw that and then decided to mirror it. And that's where I was just wowed. I was blown away. And so something that we talked about in our nonprofit years was that wherever the level of leadership that the leader was at, like their level, their skill level.
Yeah, ceiling.
Yeah, exactly. Wherever they're at, if they're at this height, then your volunteers are going to be lower. They're never going to surpass you. If you want your volunteers leadership level to rise, you need to raise yours. And it was really powerful for us at that time, and we saw it work. And so for me to see that echoed and mirrored in the tracks that we would go to, that was also incredible as well, to see that it was just consistency with people. And the more TOs loved on others, the more volunteers would love on others. And so little things that you can do like signage or saying hello, but not just saying hello and offering that tour guide.
I'm your tour guide for the evening.
Things like that. It just takes that stress away. And so those newcomers that come in, people who know nothing of the sport, those are going to be the people that are so wowed that then they talk about you and you have that word of mouth marketing. And so it's amazing to see how even our story with Rad Canyon, we have shared that story 20 times, maybe more, and bragged on them because of what they did. And it was so amazing. But I've also had bad experiences where I've said, I don't know that we're going to go back. That was really disappointing. And it sucked. And I felt so bad for anyone new that was going to come there. And I just knew that, yeah, they're probably not going to last in that leadership role. Somebody else is going to come in and just take over.
But then that person has a lot of work. And if you're a TO listening, you may have stepped into a similar situation where there are a lot of hurdles to get through. Even even talking to Sean Coleman when I did, is that he had a lot of hurdles to get through from from where the track was. And so you might be coming in and you might have a lot of hurdles to get through. You might be dealing through that season now. You might be looking at that season. You may be looking at taking that track over and saying, well, there's a lot to do. Well, it starts with that leadership. And like India talked about with that leadership is that um, to piggyback on that is that you can't lead leaders that are higher than you. And so when you want those next level volunteers within your track community, if you are not surpassing that next level volunteer, you are not going to get those next level volunteers. And a great example, I think, is the conversation, which there's more to talk about with this, with Paul DePaul. And the number of people that listened to that podcast, the number of people that watched that podcast. Paul is a well-loved dude.
Mhm.
He is a well-loved TO. He is supported, he is cared for, he is cared about. But if you listen to the episode, he throws all of the attention back. I mean, I kept trying to ask him about him, and he kept saying them. And he is so focused, as is Sean Coleman, constantly saying, I'm not important here. It's them. Well, maybe, but you are important. And so, Paul, Sean, like, thank you so much for what you do, because you are bringing in these teams and your leadership is echoing what you want to create. And so anyway, going back to the premise of this conversation is that the whole focus of this is, if you want your track to grow, you need to know the perspective of somebody who has not been in the sport before. And if you are just I also want to say, whether you are a TO, whether you are a volunteer, or whether you are a rider, you have the ability to address some of these concerns or some of these roadblocks, barriers, hurdles, whatever you want to call them, that India mentioned, and you have the ability to change that within your track. If nobody's doing that at your track, you can be that.
I was going to say, because this is something that I've also carried with me over the years, is if you're seeing a problem and you think, man, they should really just be doing this. They should really just be doing this. And I've heard that so many times throughout our BMX history. Yeah. They should be really, yeah. If you see it, it is officially now your responsibility to do it, because not everyone can see it. And the fact that you can tells me and everyone else that you have a strength in that area to cause a change for the better. And honestly, you're doing them a disservice by not putting yourself out there as that volunteer or contributor to make sure that this problem is solved. So asking your TO to fix something or to change something, I get it. There are some things that we absolutely cannot do as volunteers, and that the TO has to, take that responsibility on. But I would suggest that 90% of things, if you see a problem and you say something, now it's your job.
Yeah. And that's cool. Sometimes it's not exciting.
I've had to eat my own words with that, by the way. But I think it's important, though. My skill set obviously is signage. I care about these things. I see these areas that are struggling. So then I say something. And then what I follow it up with is say, if you need help, I would be happy to help you figure that out or create that or tell you where to order these signs.
Yeah. Which usually, and we have enough experience in some of those conversations and situations where India and I will both say, we will help you with this if you're going to take action on it.
Yeah.
Are you interested? And India can even give a track, a rough ballpark of like, okay, your signage is probably going to be $400 or $500. And then for some tracks will go, no, absolutely not. And
naturally, depending on the material they're made of. So
yeah. I mean, yeah, sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more. But if there's a ballpark that's thrown out, I will say that will improve your ability to retain new families. And as we know, your experienced riders are a phenomenal part of your track, but new families is really where that grows and thrives from.
Mhm.
And so anyway, we've gone to tracks that are very hospitable. We've gone to tracks that are not hospitable.
Yep.
We've given tracks that are lacking hospitality multiple chances.
Yeah. Yeah. Never,
And
never just one time. Yeah.
there are times when we've been surprised in a good way, and then there's times where we've been really surprised in a not great way.
Mhm.
At this moment, I'm going to interrupt our episode, our current interview, briefly to give a special shout out and thank you to our sponsors that have backed us financially in this project, in our mission, and give them a huge thank you. So at our gold level, we have Luminex Neon and Marketing Breakthrough. At our silver level, we have Sound Cedar Lumber and Bicycle Thieves. And at our bronze level, we have Pro Start Gates and Justin Shepard, Title Examiner. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for backing us. If you are looking for help with any project that you're working on, if you're looking for some cool things to do, go ahead and check out the links to their websites in our description and go ahead and visit them, show them some love. We are so appreciative for their support. And if you are interested in getting involved in a local track, helping out, or sponsoring a local track, sponsoring the BMX Breakthrough project as a whole, please reach out at j@bmxbreakthrough.com. You can also go to our website and find out some of the needs of tracks and some of the things that we are working on at bmxbreakthrough.com. Once again, thank you so much for your support. Let's dive back into this conversation.
From your experience, so if somebody's listening to this and they're like, oh, my new families, we need to get them over to the state races or bring them to a national.
Oh, yeah. Good question.
Can you shed some light on that from the perspective of, let's see, we started out with Oliver at 4 years old,
Mhm.
and now our oldest is 7.5.
Okay.
So
Especially
from
with
your
young
perspective,
riders. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. So, one thing that I want to mention is that I have, as a parent, I've never been the parent that has decided or, that allows, I guess, my kids' sporting schedule to dictate my life. That's always been something that we try really hard to be caution on. Even the conversation about little kids soccer is like, well, it's a big commitment. We're going to have to do this many times a week. And it's a lot. And so something we were just cautious on that. And so you'll have some parents that they're like completely sold out. This is my life. And they kind of like live through their children. And I don't say that as a judgment as much as a cultural just acknowledgement is that you'll have that. And then you'll have parents that are just like dipping their toe in the water type of thing. And so I mention it because when we started racing a lot more, the natural progression is this push like, oh, you got to go to the state race or, oh, you got to go to the national because everyone's talking about it and you don't want to miss out. So you feel like you need to go there. But we did a state race locally many years ago. And it was there that I decided, nope, I don't want to do this again. And not to say that I didn't like state races. They were great. The race was great. And the nationals that we went to were great. But when you have young writers, it was incredibly challenging because my whole job surrounded feeding them and making sure that we could time a nap if we could possibly fit one in and caffeinating them. I mean, it, it was really hard because then became all about winning and all about just having enough energy to push. And then, of course, your kid, because they're exhausted from an entire day in the sun and not having a break and a place to rest and relax. And there's sensory overload because there's tons of people. And the only place to go to the bathroom is 12 porta potties. And then, of course, as a parent, you're like, don't touch that, don't touch that, like, when they're going to the bathroom. And there, some parents don't even have like a third person help. Like we had GPAW, so then that was helpful. Yay, GPAW, thank you. Um, but it's just, it was even describing it, I'm stressed out. It was so hard. And we were only there for one day. It wasn't even like that big, but because there were, you could even probably remember how many motos there were.
Oh, I don't remember at the state races, but But
it wasn't nearly as many as the national. It was a small state race. But my point is that doing all of that, it was so challenging because then I told Jay, I don't get any joy out of that. My entire job is I'm herding cats and I'm trying to make sure that they don't get taken because there were so many people. If my kid decided to go off on their bike, then I was panicked and stressed out, like, oh no, where's the kids? And we started putting air tags on them. Like, it was just really, really hard.
And I think the majority of the time they are safe and they are
Oh yeah.
okay. But
As a mom, you don't know. So you're trying, you know?
I make jokes that I got questions because I would go to some of the state races and I wouldn't bring my kids, and people would naturally ask, well, where's your family at? And I would say, man, we just don't even bring the kids anymore because one, sometimes kids are a little bit more competitive. Our kids haven't fallen into that. Like, we're really competitive. They're really pushing us. At this point, it would be me dragging them along and me pushing them. And I think that the joke that I started making was India felt like her entire job was to keep the kids from bonking, to keep them from hitting the wall, whether literally or figuratively.
Which Oliver would do, our youngest, he would do before his first race. That's how tired, because he would make it through practice, which was a scheduled 10 to 20-minute chunk of time. He would do this practice. He would go. And then it would be 2 hours until he could race. And at that 2-hour mark, right before he had to race, like, buddy, we got to get your helmet on. We got to get your gloves on. He's like, I don't want to race. And it was just like, why are we here? Yeah. And then you start thinking, well, we spent money on this. So kid, have a Coke, suck it up. And like, that's not fun.
No. And it takes the joy out of it. And then for me, it made me the pressuring dad that I didn't want to be. And what I realized was that I could spend $10 or $15. Maybe the money matters. Maybe it doesn't matter. But what I started realizing was we could spend a third of the cost and we could get our young kids, the track time that they want. We could get them a concentrated amount of laps in a 2-hour period, 3-hour period for a local race. We can show up at 10 a.m. Racing's at 11 a.m. We're out of there by 12:30. They can do 15 laps before the race starts. They can do their 3 laps, 2, 3, 4 laps during the race. And then they go home and they're super excited. They're fulfilled. They're drained.
They'd be happy with practice. Yeah. Like, they wouldn't even have to go to a race. If there was somebody else on the track that they could have a, like, let's race kind of an experience, they're satisfied with that. They don't care if it's a 40-year-old guy, it could be like a 10-year-old kid. The point is that someone exists there to race that's not just their dad.
Yeah. And so I wanted to point that out because India has had a phenomenal perspective on that. And I bring it up because if you have new families that are at the track and you want to retain them for a longer period of time, I would encourage you to not worry about getting them to all of the races, but helping them to be at the races that they need to be at. If their kid just loves all the track time and really just wants to ride, then just focus on those local races. If the kid is like, man, I just want to win, I want to be, I've got this competitive spirit and I really want to go, there may be a time when you can go to the state races, but you also, I think, need to warn your families that, hey, at the state race, it's really fun. It's a big community event. Yeah, maybe we do a community dinner for our track afterwards at somebody's campsite. It's really fun because there are a lot more kids, each of the kids' ages, and it's a really fun event. It's a fun experience. But for your 5-year-old, your 6-year-old, your 7-year-old, you are sitting around for a long time. I mean, I got a message recently from somebody who said his response was, man, there was a really cool race. It was a long day. It was 9 hours of just sitting around and waiting. And for us, our 5, 6, now 7, now 6 and 7-year-old, they don't understand that.
Mhm.
They don't understand why they can't go out onto the track. And then they're busy just playing with their friends, and then they're tired from that.
So there's an important principle that I want to mention here is that to encourage those new families, or families with young kids, leave them wanting more instead of giving them so much that they burn out quick. If your kids are saying, "Oh man," if you're like holding them back and you say, "No, don't go to this one. We'll see you next week." And they're bummed. Yeah, they might be bummed, but they'll be excited and they'll be refreshed and they'll be energized to get back on the track. But if you push them too soon, especially at that young age, to go to those bigger races, it will be exhausting. And then racing comes up a few days later, and they probably still haven't physically or mentally recovered from all of that, especially the parents, because it is really, really hard. And then if the parent is grumpy or annoyed or stressed out, guaranteed that's how your kid is going to be because they sponge, they reflect how their parents are feeling. And so the more it becomes challenging, the more the kid slowly feels that burnout because then the parent is like, well, you didn't even win. What's the point? And that's a really, really, really easy perspective to have. It sounds awful, but that thought can cross a parent's mind very simply. And so if the kid isn't performing well, then all of a sudden it's like, I don't know. Now, if the kid is feeling refreshed and filled with joy, regardless of performance, and the parent is also feeling refreshed and filled with joy, then it's an amazing experience and they never want to stop. And it's wonderful. So, finding that healthy balance of how much involvement a parent has and how much involvement a kid has, even when it comes down to the racing. I'm not talking about volunteering for the kid, but finding that happy medium is going to keep your riders on the track longer.
Yeah, and that's good. And I think that's the goal. Through the BMX Breakthrough project, long term, if you ask me what is the focus, it's that, and I've said it before in a couple other episodes and interviews that I've done with people. My goal would be that kids learn through racing that they like riding their bike, and whether or not they stay involved in racing or if they move to freestyle and BMX that route, or if they move into mountain biking, it's completely fine. The goal is that they are riding their bike and they're experiencing that joy. And it can come from the track, it can come from dirt jumps, it can come from mountain bike trails, it can come from a road bike. It doesn't really matter. It can come from just riding their bike around town. And really, that is the long term focus. And
Parental stress steals the joy from riding in general, from bicycles.
yeah.
And it's an easy thing to mitigate with little things like signage and community and connection.
Would you say that I guess you spoke a little bit to this earlier, but do you have memories of your being stressed out affecting the kids?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I would get mad at them because I couldn't find their gloves. You've heard me mention it a few times in this episode about the race bags, which I did not want to spend money on. And then we bought them. Thank goodness, Jay, you bought them. And all of their stuff was in one spot. And I knew the responsibility was they took off their gloves and their helmets and they put them in their bag. And I knew without fail, they were going to be there the next time.
This is not a paid endorsement, but the Fly Racing gear bags, helmet bags, there are other helmet bags out there you can get. We don't have those. We have the Fly Racing one. It's the size of a carry-on. I have traveled with it on a plane. It's perfectly sized, but our kids can keep their race shoes, their race gloves, their jerseys,
You
extra
should just
gear,
have the
helmets.
slogan of reduces anger with every race.
Yes. Oh, it's fantastic. And then, so if you have your kids have all their stuff in there, and then you say, grab your gear bag, they're responsible for grabbing their gear bag. And if their gear bag shows up at the track and they don't have something, you can say, well, I told you to put all your stuff away.
Yeah.
And our kids have learned it's a tough lesson sometimes. And sometimes you can find alternates, you can find somebody that has some gloves or whatever. But it's a good lesson to learn. And then it also reduces our frustration on getting out the door and going, well, where did you put your gloves at? And they're in one spot.
Son has had an accident at the track because he couldn't find the bathroom.
Yeah.
And that has made, I mean, it makes you mad because, and you don't mean to be mad at your kid, but then your kid, of course, is going to look at you and think, are you mad at me? But the reality is you're just frustrated because they had an accident and because you couldn't help them.
Yeah.
No parent wants to feel helpless. You want to feel like you can satisfy all of your child's needs. And so little stressful bits and pieces that come about. I mean, even with the track, one time, it always has to do with going potty, but one time Oliver had to go to the bathroom and he had to be up at the gate. And then I was like, dude, what are you doing? We gotta go. And I finally get up there, and the guy at the gate, he's like, it's okay. I'll hold the gate. It's really okay. And I looked at him and I thought, thank you so much, because it reduced my stress. But I was already pretty much ready to yell at the kid because I was like, you should have gone earlier, you know?
Oh, actually, a recent situation that we had, and India can speak a little bit to her side of the experience with this, was at a track. And one thing that you can do is tell your families over the PA system, either at the beginning or on signage, maybe both, how long your break is going to be.
Yes.
New families
Yes.
are not going to know that you take a break or you don't take a break between the second and third moto if you do that. So at this track, we were getting ready. I didn't know how long the break would be sometimes, right? It's 1 minute, sometimes it's 5 minutes, sometimes it's 10 minutes, sometimes it's a half hour. Sometimes we've been to tracks that take like almost an hour and we're like, come on, let's just go. It's late at
Oh
night.
my gosh. Yeah. Yeah.
And so India is with Oliver and they go, okay, we're going racing. And I'm thinking, oh no, where's Oliver? So I run down, I'm searching for India. And she's then scrambling. She had heard, so she's scrambling to get his helmet on and get his gloves on. And then we can't find his bike.
Oh
And
my gosh. Yes, that day we couldn't find his bike anywhere. And I was freaking out and I was running everywhere and trying to find it. And then my daughter grabbed it, but we didn't know that she grabbed it. And she took it up to the gate, but then I couldn't find Oliver. And Oliver's like crying, "Mom, I can't find my bike." And he's running all over the place and he couldn't find it in all the spots. And I'm like, dude, where did you leave your bike? And you know, I'm panicked and he's panicked and he's freaking out. Turns out it was up at the gate because his sister had moved it and he just wasn't up there. And so simple things like that. I do want to mention that something I've noticed, and I think that this is a really easy thing to fix. Please, please, please make sure you have a speaker turned towards where the parents are. Because we can't hear you when you're on the PA system. I don't know how many times there's been an announcement. I can't hear it because it's not pointed towards where I would be.
So yeah, I would say the speaker towards people, but also the preparing people for this is how long our break is going to be.
Yeah.
And if we think back on that, like there was a stress on us. There was a stress on Oliver.
Poor kid.
Oliver he doesn't ride very well when he is stressed out. I know that. I know that of my son. If he's panicked, if he's worried, he does not ride very well.
It just he smiles when he rides 100% of the time. And when he is panicked or stressed out or sad or frustrated, he won't smile once. And all you know is that entire moment was ruined.
Yeah. And so to that end, I would just say, by that track telling me, hey, our break between Moto 2 and 3, I know that you guys don't come here very often. It's only 5 minutes long, so be prepared for that. It would have reduced stress on our part. It would have helped Oliver. Ashlyn didn't do anything wrong, but she took the bike. She was trying to be helpful, and it ended up being kind of frustrating help, but that's okay. It all worked out, and they ended up holding the gate, but at the same time, they're like, "Come on!" And somebody up there, the person in staging said, "Well, come on, we want to go," and I was like, "Oh." Okay, then just run the gate. Like, it's not the end of the world.
If you miss it,
And yeah, I mean, and so at some point I was like, fine, well, if that's your response, then go for it. But ultimately, we want our kids to be able to ride. And again, to the perspective of a first-time parent or new to the sport parent, I think it's so helpful having that, because it's really quick, or it's really easy, relatively easy to become immersed in the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And now you can speak the language, you can speak to the culture, you can have conversations in the culture.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so important to remember and talk about and find somebody that can address those questions that you had before you could.
Yes. So something that I would encourage TOs or whoever is doing registration, if you've seen a family there that's like a regular at a place, I would start saying, "Hey, now that you're a regular," or "Hey, you're one of our regular families, would you please just go out of your way to look for any new families that you don't recognize, new people, introduce yourself and ask them if just offer if they have any questions or if they need anything, go out of your way." Something as simple as that little question, that request at registration is going to trickle down from your volunteers then to your community. And it's a really simple ask. And you'll have some families that don't do it because they're just not going to, or that's not really their strength. But then you're also going to have some families that do. Imagine if you had two people out of 30 introduce themselves and say hello to someone new. One time is amazing.
Yeah.
And so something as simple as asking people to rise to the occasion is going to be incredible. But that starts with your TO. And then it trickles to the volunteers. And then the volunteers, it trickles to the families that come. People can't always volunteer that time, but they can say hello. There's no reason that they can't. And I don't know how many times I've been at a track, even a few times, that I have wished that someone would say hello to me, or that I have gone out of my way to start a conversation with someone and they don't really talk back. And it's been hard. It's challenging. And to be honest, if I was alone, I don't know that I would have continued on in the BMX world because of how hard it has been to connect in with the community just by myself, as a woman, especially.
Yeah.
But if somebody was willing to make effort, "Hey, where are you from? How's it going? Do you have any questions? Um, there's a race next week. Are you going to be here?" Something as simple as that. It will make someone feel so special and valued just in the tiniest bit. And then likely they'll come back. And they may not come back to that race, but they'll come back to the next one. And to take it further, if you introduce yourself to someone who's new, then I would go out of my way. If I had introduced myself to someone who was new, I would go out of my way to go to a TO or go to a volunteer and say, "Hey, I met someone new tonight. Do you have their information? Have you talked to them?" And make it a community thing. Almost make it like when we were doing nonprofit stuff, I would kind of make it like we were spying on people, like, "Oh, hey, there's that new person. Okay, go say hi." And so then we would make sure that they were kind of hit up multiple times with a hello. But it made their time and experience a far more exciting one.
And because how much better would your experience have been? And in the episode that just published 2 weeks ago with Brecky Breck and Kylan is their experience of coming in and having that rider. So what if you took that a step further and you had somebody that was a part of your team, and rather everybody who was a part of the team, everybody who was a part of the community, and just reached out and to text to get India's number as she's there and to text her and say, "Hey, India, next time you're coming to the track, let me know. It was great to meet you tonight. Next time you're coming to the track, let me know, and hopefully we'll be there, or we can let you know if we're going to be there," just to make that experience so much better. And something that I wanted to touch on a little bit more is that India mentioned if she was a single mom trying to come into that experience, and that's a lot of work. I mean, to the single moms out there, you are rock stars.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can make that experience, or for any parent, single parents, parents that are together, it doesn't matter. If you can make that experience throughout the week the most relaxing of a parent's week, they will want to be there.
Yeah, why wouldn't they come back?
If you can, if a parent can spend $15 to be able to sit there, know that their kid is going to be entertained 100% and watched over, but entertained for 15 or for 2 hours, amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, I can spend $15. My kid is going to run laps around the track like crazy. They're going to talk to friends. They're going to be encouraged. They're going to be loved on. I can sit here. I can take some pictures on my phone. I can take this moment to respond to a couple of messages.
Mm-hmm.
That's perfect. And then to go, when we get home, my kid is going to be so exhausted.
Yeah, they're
they
gonna
go
pass out.
right to bed.
Yep.
And you become the hero of the week.
Mm-hmm.
And
Our kids perform better in school when they're racing once a week. Just
Absolutely.
once a week. That's all it takes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so anyway, the whole point of this conversation again is to provide some perspective on that first time parent, that new parent that has zero to little familiarity in the sport. And if you can make them feel incredible and you can make them feel valued and you can make them feel like they're not dumb because they're having to ask what they feel to be dumb questions, that is going to be incredibly valuable. And if the track team can not be stressed out, that's going to be valuable as well.
Mm-hmm. So. Thanks for having me, Jay.
Yeah. Thanks for talking with me. Thank you for joining us in today's episode. It is because of people like you and our sponsors who make this whole thing possible, because they have a desire to see the sport grow. If you would like to get involved in the mission of BMX Breakthrough, you can start by going to your local track, find a way to volunteer, help out, and serve there. Or you can go to our website, bmxbreakthrough.com, in order to donate, find out about sponsorship, or learn more.